Good morning, everyone. So great to see all of you. Welcome to the 2025 New Deal Forum Ideas Summit. I'm Jonathan Dworkin, Executive Director of the New Deal Forum. We are about to get started. We're going to be hearing from the longest tenured New Deal leader active from Georgia, Scott Holcomb, in just a moment to really kick us off. But first, we have a message from the mayor of Atlanta, Andre Dickens, who wanted to be with us today. Something came up, but he has sent us a message to play to welcome us to Atlanta and start us off. So thank you all for being here and looking forward to a great next 24 hours.
Hello, everyone. This is Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens. I'm happy to greet you during the 2025 New Deal Forum Ideas Summit. This gathering of state and local leaders is crucial as we navigate the new reality of our nation's ever-evolving political landscape. Here in Atlanta, we draw circles and not lines. We serve everyone, no matter their background, where they come from, or who they vote for. My administration is working to push forward inclusive and innovative policies that reflect the voices and hopes of our diverse communities. I always say that Atlanta is a group project. We're working side by side to tackle the challenges our communities face, like the national affordable housing crisis. And with the help of our dedicated public, private, and nonprofit partners, we're on track to exceed our goal of building or preserving 20,000 affordable housing units by 2030. We've also helped fund early childhood education to the tune of more than $20 million. We're also using technology in all areas of our government to enhance our service delivery strategy on behalf of the people of this great city, including in monitoring the city's water supply. And we are thriving in Atlanta because we draw circles. For all of us to move forward, we must overlook our differences and recognize the value we provide to our residents and visitors. Effective and ethical government is built on compromise. Whether you're from a big city or a small town, we all want better lives for ourselves and our children. During this summit, I hope you find common ground to develop forward-thinking solutions for the people of your communities. Thank you again for choosing Atlanta to host this summit, and I look forward to drawing circles with all of you in the future.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Holcomb, and I serve in the Georgia House of Representatives. I have been a New Deal leader since 2013. And on behalf of my fellow New Deal leaders and alumni, we are very happy to welcome you to Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you. Our state and our capital city have a long and deep history. We are a work in progress. Georgia is a battleground state that will play a pivotal role in the direction of our country for years to come. New Deal leaders in Georgia have worked tirelessly to get us to this point, and we're not done yet. Our capital city, aware of its history, has a wonderful motto, resurgence, which means to rise again. That's what our city has done and will continue to do. We are rising again under the leadership of Mayor Andre Dickens, and I'm thrilled that he welcomed us in his video moments ago. I make it a priority to attend the Idea Summits and the national conferences because after each convening, I leave energized and with new ideas and friends from across the country. New Deal exists to help those of us who work in state and local government because what we do matters. Our policies, our leadership, and our service have ripple effects that stretch far beyond our jurisdictions. I want to extend my sincere thanks to the New Deal team for your hard work organizing this summit. We are all enormously grateful that you brought us together. And we are gathering in an important place at an important time. Georgia has endured and overcome demagogues, and we've also benefited from inspiring and visionary leaders who changed the world for the better. Through their work, they bent the moral arc of the universe toward justice. We meet at a moment when the idea of America, who we are and what we stand for, is being tested again from forces both within and beyond our borders. Lately, I've been doing some reading about the periods leading up to the world wars of the 20th century. Now, don't read too much into that. I'm a former Army officer, and those eras are periods that I typically study. And there are some lessons, though, that are still relevant to today. One such lesson for World War I is the danger of miscalculation. Many believed at that time that free trade would prevent conflict, that nations that traded and were economically entwined would never go to war, but they did. Leaders also assumed before World War I that it would be brief. Every major country that was involved thought the war would last only weeks. Today, we can hear echoes of that hubris and hollow promises to end a war in Ukraine in one day, and that trade wars will be simple and easily solved. And another lesson that went unheeded is that leaders failed to anticipate political backlash. Thankfully, a backlash against the current administration is growing. We see it in our communities, and I trust you see it in yours. As Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. I say this as we operate under federal administration that generally lacks a historical perspective, and on the few occasions when it has one, it draws the wrong conclusions. And while the administration claims to want peace through strength, it has adopted policies that increase uncertainty and heighten the chances of conflict, neither of which promotes economic growth and opportunity, which we all care about. So where does that leave us? This is undoubtedly a challenging moment, but history is not inevitable. We shape it together through the ideas we bring forward and the choices we make, guided by our values. As a former of Atlanta used to say, we are in the future business. No organization guides discussions about our future better than New Deal. We learn from each other, exchange best practices, and then we take what we learn and put it into action in our respective communities and states. We also encourage each other, cheer for each other, and we want to see the people that we serve succeed as well as each other. And no one cheers on our successes more than New Deal's leader, Debbie Cox Bolton. Debbie has Debbie has worked for decades to make government more effective and responsive at every level. She's tireless in her efforts to help each of us become better leaders. She loves all of us, despite our idiosyncrasies, and we love her right back. Debbie's energy is contagious, her optimism is unwavering, and her commitment to public service is unmatched. Spend time with her and you will feel better. It is my great honor to introduce to you New Deal CEO, Debbie Cox Bolton.
Cry before I get up there. That's terrible. But I do want to say it is true. I love all of you so much. So thank you, Scott. I want to just say about Scott Holcomb, who has been one of the New Deal leaders, as he said, for so long. He embodies what, to me, it means to be a good leader in these days, right? His service, not just in the military, but then in the legislature, is born from a place of his values, from grace, openness about working across the aisle, and he does it all with such humor, and he's just the best. So thank you so much, Scott. So welcome, everyone, again. I am so very grateful to be here with all of you. Grateful to be able to be with this wonderful, inspiring, and very important community at this time. I think that a lot of us were together last at our conference in Washington, D.C., 2 weeks after the election. And I think we were talking about what happened and where we go from here. And we were gearing up for what we knew was going to be a very chaotic and disturbing 4 years. But I actually do not think that any of us in that moment could have predicted just how quickly and overwhelming the all-out assault on the very foundations of our country were going to be. the blatant disregard for due process and rule of law, the chaotic and non-strategic dismantling of our federal government, and vilifying public servants, cruelty symbolized by a billionaire with a chainsaw, and an unnecessary trade war with allies and enemies alike, plunging our economy into uncertainty and free fall. In just over 100 days, this administration has made every person in America less secure, less free, and less prosperous. So there is no doubt that these are dark and uncertain times. But I often have to remind myself, as Scott was saying too, that our country has been through these times before. It's fitting that we're here in Atlanta, a city that's been witness to so many of our monumental experiences as a country over the last 250 years, from the Civil War to civil rights. Of course, now we have the benefit of knowing how those turned out. I think we all know that we are in a monumentous time for the United States, and of course, we're living it and do not know how the story will unfold. But as we gather today here, 100 days after the start of this administration, I think we're more clear-eyed about the task in front of us. And as always, state and local leaders, you all are on the front lines of where we're going to go. People are looking to you for answers. They're looking for you for protection. And frankly, they're looking for you to step in to pick up the pieces of so much that is unraveling. And that is a lot. So I want to say that, as always, we see you, we understand what you're having to face, and we're here for you. As I think about the critical task that's here before all of us, I believe there's 3 things we must do. First, I think we have to speak up and speak out. I agree with those who say we just have to fight. I'm grateful for the attorneys general and the city attorneys who are challenging the administration's unlawfulness in court. I'm grateful that people are showing up at rallies in purple, blue, and red cities and states across the country, protesting and demanding change. But as we fight, I think we need to think about a couple things. First, I think we need to make room for all people who want to join us in this fight. This is not a time to be, I told you soing, or how did you let this happen, or pointing fingers. It's not a time to stay in our own echo chambers and see who can yell the loudest and preach to the choir. We have to welcome everyone who's concerned about the direction of this country into this fight, whether or not we agree with them on everything. No litmus tests, a big tent. Which leads me to another point. I also don't think there's one right way to fight. I think this is a conversation happening on our side of the aisle right now, and I just want you to know that these are unprecedented times, and I think we need to give each other a lot of grace. What we need right now is not a right answer, because there isn't one. What we need is authentic voices. We each need to be willing to speak our minds and our hearts, even if it's not in lockstep with everyone around us. People respond to authenticity. That's part of the reason we're in this mess that we're in. And as our fearless coach, Ian Kahn, likes to tell us, we need to be ourselves because everybody else is taken. So I know you are already doing that. You're showing up every day. You are fighting for your constituents. You're engaging your communities. You're calling out injustices. And you're trying to solve problems in any way that you can. And if anybody needs to hear this, I just want to tell you, don't let anyone tell you that you're doing it wrong. You just keep showing up. So secondly, while opposition is necessary, it's not sufficient. The November election showed us that people are not satisfied with the status quo and the direction of this country. They did not believe that government was delivering for them. So we can't only just be opposed to what's happening. We've got to simultaneously offer a message and ideas that can both attract and deliver for a majority of Americans. We need to really listen to those who say that the cost of living is too high and we have to do something about it. We have to meet people where they are, people who live and work differently than we are, and find out what they need and help them. And for those of us who believe that government can do the good things, we have to acknowledge that government is often, too often, not working, and be willing to do things differently. We have to just stop defending programs that are not delivering just because they worked in the past or because we thought of them. We have to tell our friends no sometimes. And we have to shift our focus away from inputs, how many bills we're passing, how much money we're spending, to laser focus on outcomes and results. Which leads me to my third and final point. We have to understand that what comes next, whatever that's going to be, is not going back to what things were. It was not working for too many people. We were talking about this coming out of COVID, if you remember. the bright spotlight that had been shown on the inequities in our economy, that too many people didn't have access to or had barriers to sufficient resources and opportunities. So we know there is still much work to do. So while we fight and help support people through this time, let's also keep an eye forward on rebuilding to a way that works better. Over the next 24 hours, we're going to be rolling up our sleeves and talking about exactly how to make government work better. We're going to be getting real about what happening with tariffs, public health, our democracy, and more, and strategies for responses. And we'll be talking about public service, how we can support those of you in elected office, and how we can lead differently, really listening and bringing people together. The good news, and the reason I continue to have so much hope and confidence that things are going to be all right, is because of this community. I know that the people in this room have the tenacity, the resilience, the creativity, and the courage that we need at this moment, and that together we are going to have a brighter future. Thank you all for being here. All right, so it is my great pleasure now to welcome up a good friend of mine who we're going to have a conversation. Mark Dunkelman is the author of a fantastic book, a buzzy book, an important book called, let me make sure I'm going to get it right, exactly, Why Nothing Works, Who Killed Progress, and How to Bring It Back. So Mark is a fellow at Brown University's Institute for International Public Affairs. He's a former fellow at NYU's Marion Institute of Urban Management. He's worked for Democratic members in both the Senate and the House, and his thoughts and opinions have been widely published. In addition to this great book, he is author of another book called The Vanishing Neighbor, which is also a great read. And I'm excited to have a conversation with Mark about how we make government work better. Let me move over here. Hi.
Hello.
Great to have you here. Thanks for being here.
This is the kind of forum that is the highlight of this book tour, is talking to these folks. This book was written for all of you.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it really is a great book. It's for folks who haven't read it, and this is probably where I'll start my conversation, my questions for you. It's a really, really interesting and informative look at the progressive movement, small p, over the course of the last century, and how two competing instincts within the progressive movement, one about centralizing government to solve problems and one about having a more diffuse way to solve problems, are often in conflict with each other, and how that has really impacted the way that we can actually govern. So maybe I'll start with you just talking a little bit more about that, and with a couple examples maybe to show the different impulses, and where you think we are right now on the spectrum of that balance.
Sure. So the thesis of the book is that if any of us went to see a person sitting in a coffee shop in one of our districts and they were a Democratic voter, and we asked them what their top two priorities were before the last election, and someone said something to us like climate change and reproductive rights, no one would have thought twice about that. Like, that would seem very ordinary. But when you say those two things, the things that we all think about immediately afterwards about what we want to have happen in the striving for both to combat climate change and to protect reproductive rights. In the first case, in climate change, we want to push power into some bureaucracy or institution that will stop emitters from polluting the environment, right? We want to stop climate change by pushing power up into someone who is powerful enough to tell the people that are throwing carbon into the atmosphere to stop. That's a Hamiltonian impulse. We want to build something that will solve a tragedy of the common. Move to reproductive rights, that's not the narrative at all. The story in our heads, to use Walter Lippmann's now century-old term, the story in our heads is that there is a bureaucrat somewhere that is trying to tell women what to do with their bodies, and we want to take that power that is invested in an institution and push it down to the individual. Those are two different, like set aside the merits of either issue, they're two different ways of thinking about what it means to be a progressive or to be a reformer. One is pushing power up in a Hamiltonian sense, building institutions. The other is explicitly Jeffersonian. Jefferson is now a controversial figure for personal reasons, but like in the ideal sense, Jefferson wanted to empower, lay farmers, property owners. Like it was a subset of the people that we believe should be empowered, but he was afraid of centralized power. Hamilton wanted to create it. So these are two different instincts. And from the beginning of the progressive movement, which was not, like now progressives are seen, like that word has been sort of taken by the far left. Like the progressive movement was like a bunch of Republicans at the beginning, right? It was TR was the first progressive candidate for president, Theodore Roosevelt, and so like the sort of notion of progressivism in the way that I think we're using it here is a pretty broad spectrum of people, from the very far left to moderate Republicans, like Nelson Rockefeller, who the former governor of New York would be considered a progressive today, or George Romney, the governor of Michigan. But across the spectrum, these two impulses have been part of our ideology from the very beginning. So that even like in the early 20th century, they were people who saw the world as it was changing under the Industrial Revolution and thought to themselves, I miss the sort of the patterns of the 19th century, of sort of small town life, of island communities and whatnot. And they wanted to take these big corporations, which were disrupting everything, and break them up, antitrust. That was a Jeffersonian impulse. Let's cut up the big institutions so that we can return. And so like trust busting, that was a Jeffersonian impulse within the progressive movement. Others said to themselves, no, the problem is not that we don't have enough small businesses. The problem is that government hasn't kept up with the challenge of the big businesses that have emerged because of industrialization. You're not going to break up the railroads. It doesn't make any sense. You're not going to break up the steel. It's too much efficiency. What we need are big government institutions that are going to regulate these big institutions. So you get the Federal Reserve, the Federal Trade Commission, a bunch of so within progressivism, and this is this is not exactly on point of what folks in this room need to know. I just want, this is something that has been glossed over, I think, too often among progressives. We are ourselves in our heads and our hearts divided in thinking about, here's a problem. In this case, do we want to push power up into some institution that's going to fix it? Or are we afraid that pushing power up will empower some institution that we don't trust? And throughout progressive history, like, if you go back to your high school textbook and they ask you what were the early progressives for, it'll go through a whole litany. Women's suffrage, income tax, like, you will also say blue ribbon commissions, so that is empowering powerful figures to make decisions on behalf of the community as a whole, and public referenda, which is the exact opposite, right? It's letting ordinary people vote on things directly, bypassing legislature. We have always had these two impulses, sometimes to push power up, sometimes to push power down, and we continue. Everyone in this room, I suspect, has these two impulses, and we've just never talked about them as being competing impulses that you need to balance. So as a framework for thinking about, I'm a mayor, I'm a county commissioner, I'm a member of a legislative body, whatever it is, these are two different ideas, and you don't have to believe that one is entirely correct and one is entirely wrong. What you need to realize is that we are all sort of inured to both. We both harbor these instincts, and we need to think thoroughly about to what degree we want to push in one direction or the other, how we balance the two as we're trying to solve problems of all sorts.
So you've talked in the book about some of the legacy challenges that both impulses leave us as progressives, small p, who are trying to solve problems. So one of the areas you talk a lot about is this idea of giving people a voice versus a veto. And I think that's something that all of the leaders in the room will have familiarity with, of this idea. You have a great story in the book about New York building and the fact that one single legislator could stop the whole thing. How do you think about how we make sure that communities and people have a voice in the process, which we all think is a good idea, but not let a single person stop progress?
Here, I think the history is super important. So I mentioned at the sort of the turn of the 20th century that progressives were caught between these two impulses, to push power up or to push power down. The guys that wanted to push power up largely won. Like Woodrow Wilson ran for president in 1912 as sort of like, I'm a Jeffersonian, I'm a Southerner, I'm going to push power down. But then he creates the Federal Reserve and the Federal Trade Commission, and like you get some big centralized power in the Wilson administration. And really from that moment through the 1960s, progressivism maintains both impulses, but we That's the movement, and this is going to sound strange to a lot of people in this room. We created the establishment. Like, we had the idea that in New York, it didn't make sense to have the folks on the New Jersey side of the Hudson and the New York side of the Hudson competing on docking fees in the harbor. So we created a port authority, which would regularize those things. Like the Port Authority, a big, powerful institution. We created the Triborough-Britain Tunnel Authority. We created all sorts of institutions throughout America. Every town had sort of a blue ribbon commission. There's this old phrase that we all know, you can't fight City Hall. A lot of people will hear that. That never meant that you couldn't unseat an incumbent mayor. Like, that was happening all the time. The notion was that there was some powerful cabal of people behind the mayor that whoever was sitting in that seat would have to heed. So if City Hall, those establishment figures, wanted to build a housing development on the west side of town, they wanted to build a bridge across the river here, whatever they wanted to do, there's nothing you could do about it. From the turn of the 20th century through the 1960s, progressivism is seeing tragedy of the commons, saying, I'm going to push power into a big institution that's going to solve it. The sort of the quintessential example is the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was in the early 30s, just like the upper South in America was living in the 19th century in ways the rest of the country was living in the 20th. There was no electric power. The local utilities had no profit incentive to run wires to these poor farmers who are living really sort of miserable lives. No electricity, no appliances, no nothing. And with the utilities, with the private market basically having failed, the Roosevelt administration creates this incredibly powerful Tennessee Valley Authority, empowers a lawyer from Wisconsin named David Lilienthal to basically just be like a czar of a region that's the size of England. And he does these things. He condemns land, he builds dams, he builds power plants, he connects these poor farmers up, he builds the wires from the grid to the farms, like he sells appliances to the farm, it's just enormous centralized power. And one of the most interesting discoveries I made in the course of the research for the book is I found this 4-part series in The Nation magazine, lauding Lilienthal as just this benevolent dictator. The Nation magazine, like the Nation that we all don't read still, and so that was the progressive dream. It was a Hamiltonian dream, and the same thing happened in other parts of the New Deal, the Social Security Administration, and after the New Deal with these sort of big bureaucracies, the Highway Administration, urban renewal, all sorts of policies. And then we get to the 60s and progressives, and I think I can say this, they're like, holy shit. What did we create? This Frankenstein monster of the establishment is now doing things that we hate, right? It's this imperious Pentagon that has sent us into Southeast Asia. It's the local housing authorities are knocking down whole neighborhoods, often minority neighborhoods, certainly poor neighborhoods, to make room for high rises for people. We are knocking down whole neighborhoods to build highways, right? And the people that are doing these bad things, I just want to be, this is weird for us, but these are the progressive visionaries. This is what the early progressives wanted. They wanted really powerful executive authority to be able to do big things for America that Americans couldn't do for themselves. Build sewage systems, build transportation systems, build housing, all these things. There was an establishment that did that. And now in the 60s, we progressives are sort of looking back at our own Frankenstein's monster and saying to ourselves, whoa, this is too much. And naturally, the thing that you do in that moment is to say, how do we put guardrails around these monsters? How do we, the story, the book that my book sort of keys off of is The Power Broker, which is this 1,800-page tome by Robert Moses that won the Pulitzer Prize in 1974 that everyone has on their shelf, and about a third to a quarter of people have actually read. It's sort of a nice thing to display on your and it takes up a lot of room on the bookshelf, so you look cool. But the book is basically this story, right? Moses was an old small p progressive, and he becomes very powerful, and then he just does stuff to New York that people are outraged about. He mows down forests. He tears down neighborhoods. He threatened other neighborhoods that were some of that saved by Jane Jacobs. It's a sort of and the most iconic is that he builds the Cross Bronx Expressway across the South Bronx, destroyed a bunch of working class neighborhoods, and then by the time that's in the 50s, by the 70s when the book comes out, not coincidentally, like weeks after Richard Nixon resigns, the South Bronx is an urban wasteland. And like it's so clear to progressives that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that our job now is to put guardrails, to insert points where ordinary people can check these establishment figures. And so that comes in just waves. You just see it. It's interesting as the research went on for this book, like in various realms, in the world of transmission and electrical transmission and housing and public transportation and other infrastructure, everyone has a story like this. Like this is the constant narrative, but nobody from one, very rarely do people in like the transportation space talk to the people in the transmission space, talk to the people in the housing space. They're all dealing with different laws passed in the same moment with the same spirit of we're not gonna let these motherfuckers do this to us anymore. And so we're gonna create environmental laws that make it so that before you can build a housing project, you have to consult with the community. Before you build a transportation, there's an arcane amendment put in the 1966 Transportation Authorization Bill called the Yarborough Rule, designed to make it so that so that the Texas Department of Highway Department couldn't build a road from San Antonio to the airport through a park that becomes a Supreme Court case, and Thurgood Marshall issues a ruling that essentially makes it impossible for any project that includes federal transportation dollars to touch a single blade of grass in a public place, like a golf course. You can't go through a golf course. In the same, over and over, there's housing preservation laws, there's wetlands protection. In all these cases, there is some impulse to empower some bureaucracy, like the Clean Water Act. There are elements where you're going to have the EPA come and do, but in most cases, it's private action, right? It's that there is someone in the community who doesn't want that thing to be done by the establishment, and we as Democrats and progressives are going to create mechanisms where they can stop it. I want to just pause here to say, both the impulse to want to build more electricity for poor people and the impulse not to want some establishment to push people out of their homes because you're reclaiming that land for a highway or for a whatever, these are both impulses that most people in this room will embrace. These are both rational, thoughtful, well-intentioned in most cases, and they're both, if taken to an extreme, terribly corrupt. Like, you don't want a system where one person can do something without consulting any of the people around, and you don't want a system in which anyone can raise any objection, specious though it may be, that would make it so the project can't go, or that they could, even more insidious is that in many cases, people don't even propose good projects because they know that someone is going to raise an objection, and that objection is going to lead to a court case, and there's going to be gazillion dollars in legal costs and delays, and it's like in the end, it's not going to pencil out, not because the project isn't good, but because the process is too much. And so we've got a housing crisis in this country. We don't have high-speed rail. We've got bridges falling down. We've got places where clearly there's room for growth, and we're not doing it. These are all the children. This is all downstream of the fact that for the last 50 years, our movement has made it almost impossible to do things. And then I'll end this monologue with this, which is that's why Trump was elected, right? This is, if we as Democrats are the party of government and government isn't working, people are going to turn to the other side, and certainly a guy that seems to not care about rules at all. So, this is sort of the last point that I really want to leave you with, and though I'm happy to talk more. the point I'd like you to come away with is like, we are culpable for this mess. Like, if we are not going to do the hard work of helping people imagine how we're going to decide, as you said in the question, between people should have a voice but not a veto, if we're not going to create systems that create that sort of dynamic, where ultimately, in relatively expeditious form, government hears all the concerns and then makes a decision and moves forward, like, you can't be surprised that, like, ordinary voters who expect government to do this will turn to the other side and to a madman who's going to break through this incompetent bureaucracy. Which is not to say that we're at fault entirely and like the conservatives are off the hook. It is to say that like the sadness is that we have some culpability here, but that's also the opportunity. Like, we could articulate new mechanisms, and this is sort of what, I mean, go forth and do this. Like, right, we need you as young leaders and aspiring leaders to be thinking of like, here's a way to balance the Jeffersonian and the Hamiltonian impulse, so that when we are thinking about how to do housing the correct way, or transportation the correct way, or energy the correct way, that you are incorporating these two impulses in a balanced way.
Okay, before we bring up a panel that's going to follow this to talk a little bit in the weeds about how we do that, I am going to put you on the hook you are talking to a bunch of leaders around this country who are responsible for balancing these competing priorities and figuring out what the right mechanism is to make progress. So if you could leave them with one or two pieces of advice on how to do that, what do you tell them?
Yeah, so the first is, my feeling is, just to the degree that most progressives don't have in their intellectual toolkits this idea that there are two impulses that you're trying to weigh, right? You enter you enter the conversation about there's a new housing development, and the presumption in many cases is that the progressive position is to be against development. Like, that's like, they're the developers and they are bad, and the progressives are against development and want to preserve green space or whatever it is. My advice to you is to think, the first advice is to think through the situation. You've got competing priorities. Yes, you want to maintain green space. You want people to have access to parks and to preserve landscape that is in danger. You also have a priority to provide housing. So that's one. Two, and this is going to get me a little hot water, because I bet you everyone in this room has already purchased Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's book, Abundance, which is a great book. There is now a growing movement on the other side to say, no, I don't think that there should be any review. The building housing should be an entire ministerial thing. Like, this is what YIMBYism is, right? If there's a plot of land, you should be able to build, and the owner wants to build whatever it is, a fourplex on a single family plot. There should be nothing stopping them. And I think in many cases that's probably right, but there are others where it's not right, right? And like, this is probably the reason that YIMBYism has sort of sped ahead of all other elements of the agenda, on the abundance agenda, to use that phrase, abundance, because it's easy for us as progressives to say power is now among the no's at the neighborhood level, and we can devolve it to the person who owns the plot and wants to build. So that's a sort of an automatic yes. That's a Jeffersonian change. Obviously, there are two things about it. One is, it doesn't work for transmission lines. It doesn't work for rail. It doesn't, there's no way to devolve power. Like, you need some powerful institution to decide where the rail is going to go, where the transmission line is going to go, where the bridge is going to be built, et cetera, et cetera. But two, I don't love progressivism going to a place where people who have legitimate gripes about where housing is going to be built are told that they have no voice, right? That it's just this. What we want is for people to feel. I'm sorry for those of you who went to college and read John Rawls and didn't understand it then. I still don't understand it, but I'm going to use the veil of ignorance, which many of you may remember. The question is, someone but before you know what the housing project is going to be, what the authorities are going to choose, what is a process that would make people feel as if they had voice, but did not give them a veto? What would make it so that if the result of the process was something that they didn't accept or they didn't like, they still would presume that the process was on the up and up? Because right now, the moment you don't get the outcome you want, you sue because you say the process was messed up, or they didn't consider this environmental consideration, or there's always another. It seems like there's always another thing you can do to get the outcome you want. Our goal as progressives should be to give ordinary Americans a sense that there is someone in charge who is going to weigh their private interest at their house or in their little neighborhood against the interests of the country as a whole, and weigh those private and parochial concerns seriously, not just sort of wave them off. So I would say to you, like, that is the system that we need, not one that is Robert Moses ignoring everyone, not one where everyone who has any objection has actually the power to stop it. We need to have some balance, and that's going to change in realm to realm. And that's, but I think that's a more popular and more palatable platform for progressives to articulate. And I would hope that the folks in this room would be able to see that as a roadmap for the future.
Wonderful. Can you all join me in thanking Mark Dunkelman for his time? And again, if you have not picked up the book, I highly recommend it. I think we're selling copies actually outside, but it's a really just another way to put us in perspective on history about where we are in this movement and how to make government work better. So thank you, Mark. I'm going to now invite up to the stage Dana Barrett, another fantastic local New Deal leader, Fulton County Commissioner, who's going to lead a panel on, I think, coming off of this conversation, what we actually do to break some of these barriers down and make government work. Dana. As we're setting up, I think I forgot one of my jobs. As we're setting up, I think we're going to play a quick video. I'm supposed to tell you that throughout the 24 hours together, you're going to hear from some people who couldn't be with us, but who wanted to share messages to you. And I just think that you should really take that as a sign of how important the work that this group is doing on the ground, that some of the leading figures in our party and our country want to make sure that they have a message for you. So I think we're going to play one of those right now.
Hey everyone, it's Pete. I'm excited that New Deal leaders are coming together in Atlanta, and a little bit jealous that I won't be able to join you this time, but I appreciate a chance to say a couple of words. New Deal has been one of the most important organizations in my own experience for getting to know people who are facing common challenges, for sharpening my ideas, and exchanging thoughts toward a vision for a better future. And that was really important 10 years ago when I was getting involved. It's incredibly important today, as we all know. And it's especially important for state and local leaders to be getting together, because I think most Americans understand that key answers are going to have to come from outside of Washington. You are closer than anyone in the elected world to the everyday needs and challenges of Americans who are wondering what their future is going to be. And in order to respond to what's happening, our opposition to the abuses of this administration has to be coupled with a clear, proactive answer of what we should be doing instead, of what comes next. An answer that has to do better than some kind of return to the status quo, to what we inherited, because we wouldn't be here as a country if the way things were working, our government, our economy, and our society were just fine. Moments like this don't just happen. They happen when the institutions we've inherited are not up to the challenges of the moment. And the challenges of the moment are only growing more intense. Our political upheaval, things like climate change, AI, you name it. But you are contending with these things on the ground. And I think that means you will be at the heart of the most important thing that Democrats can do to regain the initiative when it comes to message. And that's making clear that everything we do bears on everyday life. Again, because you are at the state and local level, you are intimately connected with how politics, political outcomes, and government decisions can make everyday life better or make it worse. We see all kinds of examples out there of how it is being made worse, especially when it comes to assembles are getting together to talk about just that. So I'm cheering you on. I can't wait to see what emerges from this conference, and I want to urge you to keep it up.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I don't know, that was kind of weak. Good lunch nap, but we're going to get into a really great conversation. I think, we heard some really great concepts already in the opening conversation, but now we're going to get a little bit more specific. Although the topic for our panel was kind of general, we've got a great panel up here of folks to talk about housing and economic development, and so I changed the title. And the new title is Overcoming Barriers to Affordable Housing and How to Build or Create More. So that's what we're going to talk about. It's the same topic, just more specific. And I have this amazing panel sitting up here with me, and I am not going to do long bio reads because I want us to get into the topic, but I will introduce everybody briefly and let them share a little bit about the organizations that they come from. So starting at the far end, we have Sharon Wilson-Janelle. She is the president of the National Multifamily Housing Council. Next to her, we have Dr. Eloisa Clementich, who is the president and CEO of Invest Atlanta. And then next to me, Tara Hoops, who is the director of economic analysis at the Chamber of Progress, and I believe newly married. Yes. Congratulations. Yes, congratulations.
That's why she looks so happy.
Yes, yes. She missed our prep call because she was on her honeymoon, I believe.
Yeah, no, I just landed from Thailand and I came straight here.
There you go. That's dedication. So I want to start by asking each of you, as I said, to just share a little bit about your organization. So Sharon, do you want to start?
Sure. The National Multifamily Housing Council is an organization of 2,000 plus companies that are owner, developer, managers, operators of housing of all varieties, everything from Class A all the way down to the most affordable. But they also include equity providers, capital providers, tech companies involved in the housing space, and a variety of others who believe we need more housing in this country.
Excellent. Eloisa?
Yes, Eloisa Clementich, don't look as happy 30 years in. I'm just kidding. Don't tell my husband that. He'll go, what? Okay, just making sure you're awake. My name is Eloisa Clementich, proud president and CEO at Invest Atlanta. We're the economic development arm for the city, but what's exciting about us is we get to do a little bit of both. So we have a whole affordable housing, community development side of the house, and then we have a whole economic development side of the house. So really it's our secret sauce, but that pretty much means if no one says, hey, we got to get this done and we don't know who can do it, where do you think it ends up? All right, tough crowd, Invest Atlanta, thank you.
And Tara?
Hi, everyone. I am coming from the Chamber of Progress. We are a center-left tech trade policy coalition. We are looking to advance tech's progressive future, and also last year we released our cost of living agenda, which is where a lot of my work resides in. We also just started the Rebuild newsletter. We are coming to you live twice a week, where we are focusing on how Democrats can bring down the cost of living.
Thank you all. And I guess I should say, too, that I'm Fulton County Commissioner, and we are sitting in Fulton County right now, so welcome, and a member of New Deal, of course. So let's jump right into it and talk about the problem of the shortage of housing. And so, Sharon, I want to start with you. From your perspective, why is there such insufficient housing, and what are the biggest barriers to getting more?
The story is long, and a la our last speaker, he told a really good framework in terms of the history, but I did in fact read The Power Broker fairly recently, but I recommend it on Audible if you have a lot of laundry to fold. Still took me a month. But a lot of it is that regulatory framework that we have now, that's become embodied in many of our localities, as well as at the federal level as well. We are somewhere between 3.9 and 7 million units of housing short in this country today. Today. It's going to take, it took us a long time to get here, and a lot of various economic conditions and a variety of things, and it's going to take us a while to get out. So in terms of the policies that you're promoting at the local level, you got to be honest with your voters and say, hey, it took us a while to get here, it's going to take us a while to get out, but let's get on the right path.
Unfortunately, we're seeing increasingly a number of jurisdictions and states as well looking at easy button solutions in an effort to gain votes. Rent control, rent stabilization strategies, limiting the ability to invest in housing, increasing the bar for getting permits and increasing zoning and other things. Those processes cost time, they cost money, and exactly what our last speaker said, if you want housing in your community, some developers are going to look at that space and say, no, thank you, I don't want to go through it. So there are a whole variety of issues at play, but now is the time. We have people's attention. Last election, housing was the number 1, 2, or 3 issue at the national level in almost every state and local congressional race. We have a moment in time here, but a lot of that work starts with you at the local level.
All right, well, Tara, I'm going to jump over to you because I know you're focused so much on the policy. Are there specific policies that you're targeting in terms of making changes to sort of remove some of those barriers?
Yeah, NEPA and CEQA will be the death of me. It is the National Environmental Policy Act and the California Energy and Environmental Quality Act. These were policies that were 100% well-intended. They were born out of the 60s and the 70s. It was through the progressive movement, it was through the civil movement, and it was through a post-war era where we genuinely needed these policies during this time. But as the decades went on, these policies became so bloated where you had lawmakers kind of using it as an excuse and almost a weapon to block change whenever they could. There is one quote that always stuck out to me. It was in 2023. Karen Bass mentioned how CEQA was being weaponized, and she stated how there was a liquor store that people didn't want to build. It didn't want to have any development in that neighborhood. So they used CEQA as a way to block it, not based on environmental concern, but to concern of the environmental character of the neighborhood. So quite literally the vibes and how it would deter the character of the neighborhood. So policies like that, we are really focused on the nitty-gritty of how we can start to streamline them. And it's not to deregulate in a sense to take away all regulations, but in focus that it actually has an environmental impact and we are not just blocking progress to block progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Eloisa, I know you're kind of down in the weeds of trying to help actual developers put buildings up. So talk about, and full disclosure, I sit on the Invest Atlanta board. Did I say that?
She's the best board member, by the way. Keep it real, I'm asking for a raise soon. I'm just
But I do know that we deal with projects all the time. You deal with projects all the time where developers would like to build more affordable housing, but there are economic challenges for them to be able to do that. They're in business to make money. So talk about some of those challenges.
Yeah, when I think of housing, I think of it as a spectrum. It really is from an individual that may be homeless, but it could go all the way to how many of us have kids that are graduating with a lot of debt. Okay, am I the only one? Okay, no one else? Kids, oh, you guys are great parents to pay for all your kids' tuition. So it really becomes that spectrum of how we're providing housing for everyone and every type. What we're seeing real, in fact, I was just on a briefing call before I walked in here talking about what are some of the board items that we're bringing in 2 weeks. And we've seen 2 projects where the cost escalation of that project is up 30%. These are real. So all of a sudden we're like, woohoo, we're gonna close, we're so excited. And that was like, they came back and were like, yeah, we didn't contemplate what's happening with tariffs, we don't know, but material and labor, all the speculations, interest rates, the longer the project takes, the longer it's gonna cost. So these are real issues that we're trying to solve today, but what I can tell you is we got to get them over the line, and to your point, the longer we take, the more expensive it's gonna be. So we have to ensure that we're looking at a broad spectrum. So the last part of your question is what incentives? So we are putting everything we have on the table, from the city council, mayor's commitment, then council member, for a housing opportunity bond, which is low cost financing that we were able to put out there, to leveraging our tax allocation districts or TIFs to be able to fill in these gaps in creative ways.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see it in the practical terms, project by project, and sometimes it's different, and it does. And let's be honest, and we're gonna come to this because the NIMBY thing gets in the way too, practically for a lot of folks. It would be nice if everybody didn't feel that way, but many do.
Well, Commissioner, I'll just say, it's not a NIMBY thing. It typically is traffic.
Oh.
That is the new code word, traffic.
Yeah, yes, that is a lot of the reason people don't want that new development for sure. I wanted to kind of breeze through the sort of the root causes of the problems because I wanted us to spend more time talking about solutions. So I'm going to come to you, Tara, about this NIMBY-YIMBY thing. I know everybody's talking about moving towards the YIMBY thing, but I know in my community there are a lot of people that are not going there. They will not allow it. The zoning laws, all of the things, they do not want to have a fourplex, next door. So how do we move people into a different mindset?
So this question to me is something that I had to sit with because when I first entered this realm, I attended college from 2016 to 2020, so I have just been a hyper-partisan world setting since the day I was born, basically. So when I first learned about NIMBY versus YIMBYs, it just seemed like common sense to me to be a YIMBY, and I realized I wasn't making my case and I wasn't sowing the seed. So I think the first step here is understanding how someone gets to be a NIMBY, and it's because they're dissatisfied with the current way that their government is implementing from the basics to traffic laws to potholes and so forth. So when you feel that you are on a sinking ship, you don't want to give out more life vests, you want to preserve them for you and your family. So I think the first step is just making sure that local government delivers government well, and then you can start to understand, like, it's not a zero-sum ideology. It is where you can enter a positive sum, because zero-sum ideologies fuels reactionary politics. It's how J.D. Vance was able to honestly win his VP debate, where he mentioned how immigrants were stealing homes from you, and when you are trying to just make ends meet and you're worried about your children, you're like, should we be building more? Should we be letting people in here? So it's why one of the first steps is to build more housing, making sure your traffic lights work, making sure your kids feel safe to walk to school. And once you begin to feel a sense of comfortability, then people will slowly start to realize, like, you can build community and still feel safe and comfortable, that no one will take away your belongings.
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge because, to your point, Eloisa, and your point, I think at the end of the day, those things also cost a lot of money. So you're talking about not just putting up the development and putting those housing units in, but what is the cost from an infrastructure perspective? What do you do about the roads? If there's not high-speed rail, how do people get around? What about those traffic lights? And what about the environmental concerns and all of those things? And so for all of us who are in local government, we certainly know that getting any more money out of the budgets we already have is extremely trying. And some of those infrastructure things are just not sexy. So taxpayers don't understand and they don't want to pay for them. So it's forever challenging, I think, and I think we're going to get to this later, but we need to do a better job making the asks and explaining all of this, but also keeping it simple. So tough.
Can I just add on to, I was just going to say, I think it also has been, what I found most effective is putting the person, right? Like sometimes when you talk about affordable, everybody goes quickly to someone who's homeless. And I always try to remind, well, the incoming teacher is earning about $40,000 to $50,000 a year. Where are they going to live? And if they're having to drive 20 miles or 15 miles to get to school, how accessible will they be to do after school, whatever, sports, tutoring? So I do think once we were able to clearly say and put the person, it's your neighbor, it's your barista, it's your dry cleaner, it is, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, I really do like Mark, he's such a nice guy, I should support him. It really helped to change the conversation if it's all someone that you know in your mind that would benefit from such a program.
And that's basically what I was going to say as well. We have so many dividing lines now, racial lines, religious lines, age lines, income lines. Let's not make what we all want our communities together to be another line. And just what you're saying, I've seen a lot of success happen when we not only talk about your neighbor or your barista, talk about your children, talk about your grandchildren. This is not an overnight success. There is no one easy button that any politician at any level of government can just say, hey, if we just pass this, your housing woes will go away. This is a long-term project. And if you want your children and your grandchildren to be able to be participants in your community, it's important that we do some hard things on the front end in order to make the world a better place for them.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned, Eloisa, paying for kids' college debt. I mean, I will throw out there that, my daughter and her husband, who are in their early 30s, can't afford to buy a house. And they both have master's degrees, and they've been working full-time since they got out of college. And so, this is adding to the lack of housing. Atlanta used to be the place to go if you wanted to be able to buy a house young. I think I was able to buy my first house with my husband when I was 24.
Oh my God.
And that's Atlanta, or it was, but not anymore. Now in that very same place, my daughter and son-in-law can't do it, and it doesn't look like it's anytime soon, right? So this is all affecting people with even lower incomes than them as well. So, because they're not moving out of the apartments, right? So,
They're not moving out of our homes.
they are not moving out, right? They are one step
My
away
daughter
from being-
moved in yesterday morning in my basement apartment.
Well, let's talk about building affordable housing goals into economic development. Eloisa, I want to bring that to you because I know it's something that Invest Atlanta has done very well, but a lot of development authorities around the country are not doing that yet or have not done that. So talk a little bit about that model and how that works.
Yeah, so when we go after companies to try to attract them to Atlanta, we put this housing as part of our package of incentives that we can offer. Because what we're hearing is, before it was, oh, Eloisa, we all wanted, if you're familiar with Atlanta, like the head of the snowman, so it's head of Buckhead, Midtown, and downtown. Just think of a snowman here. So they used to all say, oh, we want to go up to Buckhead. Now we're seeing Midtown, and I predict in about 5 years we'll see more pressure or more opportunities within downtown. But what we saw was, if you ask those that we actually won, which we win a lot, go Atlanta, forget it. What we do is we ask, okay, what made you decide to come to Atlanta? And the number one thing is workforce. That really they're looking for is who has the best qualified workforce, because they want to hire people. But workers need a place to live. And so what we do is now we're very purposeful and asking, where in the spectrum are the type of employees that you're hiring? And let me tell you, if you're hiring think about the secretary or the incoming manager or project manager, their salaries are probably going to be about 60, 70,000-ish, and they're going to need some help in housing. So we'll specifically put some programs to help stimulate their employees to be able to not only come and get your job here, but also be able to live and be able to part of the community. So being real strategic on how we have grown our incentive tools that we're going to offer.
Yeah, and of course also when people are coming and wanting to build multifamily and they want some of the tax incentives to sort of build also into that model that, yes, okay, but you need to do some at an affordable level as well.
Yeah, every single project that we invest in, if we're going to put in anything in the capital stack, we're going to require affordable housing. So we're averaging about 20% affordable housing anywhere for the life of the bond or the life of the incentive. So you'll see, depending on the tool we use, anywhere between 50 to 30 years, about 60% or 80% AMI is the level that we're going to look for that time period of affordable housing. And we always like to use Trust But Verify. We actually have a compliance team that will then come back in every year and just say, hey, how's it going? Very friendly, nice notice. But we just want to make sure.
We talked, or in the first session, they talked about in the first conversation about sort of these powerful authorities. Development authorities are that way in many ways. And as I said, I think a lot of them are not yet doing some of the things that Invest Atlanta is doing. So what would you sort of say to our leaders here to take back to their towns and states about how to sort of get development authorities to embrace some of these ideas?
Everyone's development authority is a little different. I think we're really lucky in Atlanta that we have both sides of the house. And this was really important. I remember I was in a community meeting on the west side, if you're familiar, over there by the stadium, and I had one person raise their hand, and they're like, Eloisa, we don't live compartmentalized lives. Don't give me a compartmentalized solution. And that truly has been my aha moment for the last 20 so years. I'm very young, doing economic development is how do I don't have to do everything myself, but how do we lead, follow, and support, and really look at a person holistically, and I think that's the opportunity that we have Invest, is that we're gonna be able to pull in the housing side, we could pull in your commercial districts, and then we're gonna do your small business development, because if it's about creating wealth at the end of the day, you have to provide all of those opportunities to an individual.
Thank you. Sharon, I want to come over to you to talk specifically about what NMHC is doing in terms of encouraging investment. You already sort of mentioned that we need to encourage it, but how do we encourage it?
Sure. I mean, I think there are a number of different solutions. There are a number of different places to look, too. I think there's really three prongs of the stool. The state of Florida passed a law in 2023 called the Live Local Act, and it hit all three parts of the stool. One, it required that states and localities lower barriers to housing production, including by right zoning in certain locations, shorter permitting timeframes, and ensuring that there was opportunity for multifamily housing to be built in communities across Florida. There's been a little pushback on that. They're still working on it, but definitely a really important level for predictability. Two, to your point, they put their money where their mouth is. They put almost $1 billion of new investment, largely in affordable. But keep in mind, if you look at the data on this, there's a lot of science behind housing. We're not just all guessing at solutions. There is good data and research, and we can be a real resource for you and are happy to do that through our partnership with New Deal. Every unit is a good unit. So having different kinds of incentives to incentivize workforce units, deeply affordable units, units that are available for teachers and others, having different kinds of incentives is a critical part, and Live Local had part of that too. And the third part is they removed some unpredictability from investors by closing the door on rent control and rent regulation in the state of Florida. Now that sounds anti-progressive small p, it sounds like, oh, we're hurting people. The data on rent control and rent regulation is damning. There are 40 plus years that show it just doesn't work. And in fact, it disincentivizes people to come in and build the housing that we need. And in the end, who does it support? The data is very clear on this too. It largely supports upper middle income white people staying in place, effectively boxing out people that are in desperate need of housing, the teachers, the baristas, and others. So sometimes we hit those easy button solutions that our constituents think make a lot of sense, but in fact, they're hurting them now and they're gonna hurt them in the future. So a multi-pronged approach is what we're proposing. The other thing that our former speaker said that I think is also important for us to think about big picture long term is this is a three-dimensional chess game. The federal government plays a significant role in housing in that they provide a lot of resources and have some regulatory frameworks. But the states and localities also play a significant role. Well, one of the proposals that we're putting forward in Congress this session is let's use the things that work at the state and local level. Tax abatement is a program that works very well for developers to bring them in. It's fairly predictable. People know how it works. Could the federal government be a player, and could they provide a match, a local match, easy peasy, not a whole new federal program, that would match some of that local money that's going into the tax abatement, if the locality also agreed to lower barriers to housing. So those are the kinds of things we're thinking about. How can we help the localities create structures that will incentivize more development in their communities, but at the same time make the federal government not a player and a participant and a partner, and not pushing against the work that's already being done.
That was a lot. I feel like everybody's going to want more information on all of that in particular. A lot of what we're saying here, but that in particular, there was some really interesting, I'm like, how do I do that? I think we have to talk at least a little bit about what is currently happening at the federal level, because to your point, there is a lot of federal funding and federal programs that do help with some of these things. And right now, there's, if nothing else, there's certainly uncertainty. You mentioned that already, Eloisa. And you know, I just have to ask, when you're thinking about Invest Atlanta for the next year to 2 to 3, what are the concerns, and how are you sort of getting ready for potential loss of funding, and what's already happening?
Well, I went to the closet and took out my crystal ball, so I have full clarity. All right. made you
They
guys
don't let
smile.
TSA, the TSA doesn't let you bring them, so I don't have one.
Yeah. So I think that's the whole point is I just don't know, right? Because and I just sometimes feel like we're being, all these big issues are put up, like, is it really tariffs? And then am I focused on the tariff and did I miss something else? So I'm constantly trying to skim through to see what else is out there. But we're just very concerned about the continuum of care, homeless funding is on the line, or we hear, you may know better than I do, that maybe they call you, no. Anyways, we don't know.
It's early in the game.
Ah.
It's early in the game.
But that's what we're watching. What are we doing for senior housing? That one seems to be a little more safe that we're watching. And I think just in terms of just housing on that side, but also what we're doing with tax incentives, where the corporate income tax is going to land, that's going to be important to us because would there be a need to even buy these tax credits? Then think of historic tax credits, new market tax credits, all of these tools that I use every day. If no one wants to buy a tax credit, they may not have to kill that program. So those are things that we're thinking about because those are all the tools I use every single day to fund. But what is clear to us is that we're also focused on what do we have control over, and so really trying to ensure that we leverage the current tools we have. One of those being for us, it's our tax increment financing that I just want to thank both county and APS and the city for allowing us that tool because that tool now has become even more important because that is the one we have control over. So really trying to, again, I'm sure I didn't answer the question, but I honestly don't know yet the impacts.
Well, I mean, we're doing the best we can on that front, all of us trying to guess across all of the issues that we deal with, not just housing and economic development, certainly, but there's also the cost to build. I mean, the supply chain costs, with tariffs are at risk, certainly. Tara, I want to come over to you and get your take on the federal level sort of uncertainty.
When it comes to mitigating uncertainty at this level, I think you have to go back to the basics. When I look back at the Biden administration and the people's response to it, it's honestly, people felt a little infantilized. It was clear that there was concern over high prices, housing, but we weren't really hearing from leadership that often. And when we were hearing from them, they were almost just saying, it's fine, calm down, it's okay. But there's no spreadsheet in the world that could talk to anyone's lived experience. No one is ever going to feel okay if they're saying, I can't afford rent, but you're pointing to GDP numbers saying we're doing fine and amazing. So I think when it comes to uncertainty, it really helps when we have a sharp messaging tactic because we are obviously facing, as we mentioned before, unprecedented times. I've been saying that since 18 years old because I have been constantly voting against this man since that time. And that is why Democrats more than ever need focus. Cost of living will always remain to be a #1 issue for Americans. When they go to the grocery store and they see prices start to rise, they start to get angry. In the previous administration, they focused on jobs, which is always something we should have a key priority on. But when people have good jobs, they attribute that to their own experience. But when the people have high prices, they blame the government. They blame their local leaders, and they blame the fact that no one was there to talk them through it. So I urge everyone, and I believe everyone here is already doing a great job at doing so, but communicate constantly all the time on all platforms. This means being online as much as possible. Get uncomfortable, but be authentic to yourself when you do it. You often see some cringe appearances with some senators trying to do some TikTok dances, and those don't really play out well for the Zoomers, I can say. But it does play out well when you talk to us one-on-one. It does play out well when you have town halls across the countries, even in counties that you don't represent in, because it shows that you care, and that's the #1 thing that people are asking for.
I think we're going to go to some Q&A, but I do want to say, as we're kind of finishing up the panel discussion, first of all, thank you to you all. Let's give them a round of applause. I also want to just challenge everyone to be thinking about, there's a lot of good work happening, right? But how do we simplify the message about this good work and really make it, easily understood by the masses, that we are building, that we, are looking to house everyone, right? So how do we simplify that? And I don't have the answer, it's just food for thought. Do we have questions?
Hey, I'm Lee Harris. I'm from Memphis. I'm the mayor of Shelby County. And I heard that the problem is increasing rents. I heard that we don't want to regulate the rent structure and so forth. And the only thing on the table is building more houses or building more affordable housing units and so forth. And I guess my question is, have we seen that reduce rents?
Yes.
So in Atlanta or California, are rents stabilized?
There's great data on this. In fact, I'll commend to you looking at what's been going on in Minneapolis. Mayor Fry has pushed back on some forces within his own political structure that wanted to implement a rent control regime. He had his city do a very thorough analysis of where the problem was in their city, and it was two issues. One, build more housing, and two, actually rent burden, which is the amount of somebody pays in rent, is the lowest it's ever been, and this is a national number as well, but it plays out well in Minneapolis. It's about 21 or 22% of income at the highest level of income renters. It's about 24, 25 at the middle income of renters, and it's the complete reverse at the lower end. So the problem with rent increases, wages are keeping pace with the cost of housing, and there's a lot of reasons why the cost of housing, particularly rental housing, is not very controllable in some cases by the owners. State and local taxes are a pass-through, and those have gone up, as many of you well know, to keep pace with, rightfully so, paying police and firemen and others. The cost of insurance nationally has gone up dramatically since the pandemic. So there's a number of things that are not controllable in that cost of rent. But the two reasons the city came up with is, one, build more housing, and two, let's create effectively a guaranteed minimum income program for the people that actually need it, and let's target the resources and put money where it belongs to make sure the people that are falling behind so far on that wage curve can keep pace with what's happening in the market.
Thank you. As a follow-up to that, my name is Dorcia Pleers. I'm the Chief City Auditor in the City of Albany, and that's Albany, New York. But I heard the comments about the data that speaks to rent control, inclusionary zoning, and how that could be problematic potentially. But I think about, for example, a very diverse state like New York, where you have New York City, and then the rest of the state, where we know rent control was needed. The cost of living in New York City is ridiculous. And when you talk about income being comparable across the board, we know that there are huge disparities. So I'm listening with an open mind, but also listening with context from my experience being in New York. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts about that. Are you saying that these are across the board problematic because of the data, or are we talking about you have to be conscious of where you are? And then the other question, there was a comment about sharp messaging when it comes to communicating with constituencies, and we've been hearing that, and one of the reasons, you know, we lost the election, messaging. Can you give an example about, or an example of the sharp messaging that you're talking about? Because I think that even with where we are today, there seems to be a very abstract conversation about what it means to sharply communicate and message, and I just want to have a clear understanding of some examples.
I'm happy to take the rent control question. The problem with that, it's a one-size-fits-all solution. So again, New York City is a great example. The people that benefit from that effectively subsidy are largely upper middle income white people, and it does not effectively help communities of color, minority communities who want to get into New York City and have a hard time paying the rent. And two, it has a long-term impact on the buildings in New York City. There is a huge problem going on right now with buildings, rental buildings under the rent control regime in New York City effectively crumbling and cannot be habitable because there isn't enough resources under the rent control regime to keep the buildings up. The Signature Bank failure in New York was effectively a failure of the rent-controlled portfolio in New York City that Signature Bank held. So there's this looming crisis that doesn't happen right away, but it happens years later when those buildings can't be preserved because there isn't enough resource there to preserve them. So I'm happy to take that question. Much longer conversation.
I'm just going to add on the inclusionary zoning because we didn't include that. My opinion may differ just a little bit, but you're sitting right here and right next to the Beltline. So the Beltline is a 22-mile loop that's just right here. And what we've seen is this Beltline has really become Atlanta's new beachfront property, in the sense that we are seeing real estate prices escalate even higher than our most expensive market at one time, which was Buckhead. And so what the city council did is they put an inclusionary zoning around the Beltline, in the Beltline and around it. It's only been in operation probably about, 5-7 years. So we'll be able to take a look back and start to see how effective it was. But I will tell you that if it wasn't for, I think, the inclusionary zoning, we would not have the affordable housing that we do along the Beltline, and then seeing other parts of the city that do not have it, and all of their complexes are going up with no affordable. So I'm not quite sure where the story will end up, but for us, at least, it's been very effective. And for the Beltline, we have an exact goal of 5,600 affordable housing units. It's really helped us get to that unit count.
And inclusionary zoning structures can work. It just depends on how they're structured, with what kind of flexibility and what kind of income levels. But we are so short of units. Every unit that's built is a good unit, and there's good data showing that those units, as even more market rate units build, those funnel down to other people and create opportunities for others as well.
Tara, do you want to take the messaging?
Happy to take this one because I'm originally from Queens, so I can speak about messaging for New York an hour long. But when it comes to the federal level, I'll start that off. When I think back to the election, AOC was the first one to call this out, I think literally the day after. There was this one ad that I'm sure you guys all heard, Kamala is for they, them, Trump is for you. That ad played everywhere, and it resonated with millions of voters. The fact that people did not believe that the current incumbent president was not working for them, for you, felt like they could not trust the people in charge. And due to Harris's, I do believe, her inability to distance herself from the previous administration led to a lot of fault on the federal level. So I do hope and encourage for future leaders running at 28, focus on making sure that government will work for you. When it comes specifically to New York, we also have an upcoming mayoral election. We have several candidates that have come to surprise me. There is one who, I might not agree with him on all policies, but Zofran is doing great on the digital media side. He had this one thing called halal inflation, which I thought was just hilarious. And it is so specific and unique to New York, and it shows that it's authentic to who he is. When you make a joke like that, you have to actually make sure it is relatable to you and relatable to your constituents. But also, you have to realize with New Yorkers, they are used to tourists coming in, and they're kind of the biggest NIMBYs of all. They feel overcrowded, the rent is too high. They want to make sure that the person that is running for them is a true New Yorker, and that means going to door and being in their face constantly. My former mentors will hate me for telling this story, but my first internship ever, I was working for a congressman who was an incumbent Democrat. I thought it was going to be an easy one and a great thing on my resume. Towards the end, I kept hearing about this other person in the primary who I just never heard before, but I saw her everywhere going door to door, and that was AOC. She went from a nobody that no one ever heard of, but because she got out there, knocked on every single person's door in that district, introduced herself, everyone knew her name by the end of it, and they blew him out of the water. And this is coming from someone who worked on the opposite side, and I can come to the conclusion that that is what people want.
Yeah, and I'll just add on the messaging side, it is really complicated to take all the things we're talking about that are so detailed and boiling that down. And I think we have to have, and again, I don't have the total answer here, but I think we have to get it down to things that are as simple as we are building for you. Like, we are building homes for you. And then we can work out all the details behind the scenes on how we do that, and we can certainly dig into that and have policy papers and all of those things. But we have to just be leading with these really simplistic messages about the future that we are putting together.
We create communities where people build lives, and that's what rental housing is.
Yeah. I think we are out of time. So thank you all. Thank you, panelists.
Hey everybody, it's Governor Westmore. And I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I do want to thank the New Deal Forum for bringing together such remarkable leaders from around the country. And this summit couldn't come at a more important time. This moment is filled with uncertainty, and people are scared, they are hurting, and too many people feel left out of the promise of America. But here's what I do know. If we lead with courage and clarity, we can show people that government can be a force for good, and Democrats will deliver. Democrats can get this done because I see what's happening in Maryland. That in our time, we have created more jobs in the first 2 years of our administration than the previous administration got done in 8 years. That we've raised the minimum wage and we're cutting taxes for middle-class families. That we're making our communities safer, not with fear, but with partnership, by implementing evidence-based solutions and bringing communities together. We've signed into law the largest pardon for misdemeanor cannabis possession charges in the country's history because we cannot celebrate legalization if we are ignoring the consequences of criminalization. And we're growing our economy, investing in our people, and unapologetically standing up for rights and for freedoms, including reproductive freedom. This isn't a time to back down. It's a time to step up, to lead with our values, to show your work, and deliver real results. You are the future of our party. Whether you come from a battleground state, a deep blue city, or a rural red county, your leadership matters. What you do next, it matters. So keep on delivering. Let's build trust. Let's show people that Democrats know how to get things done and show that Democrats in this moment, we will not back down. We will win. Thanks again, everybody.
Okay, well, thank you to a great panel. Before this, we are going to transition now from barriers to making and implementing good policy that works as intended to how to make it easier for state and local leaders to do their jobs. And we know that it is not easy. I'm really excited for this conversation to be led by Caitlin Lewis. She's the Executive Director of Work for America, a new nonprofit working to make public service more desirable, accessible, and stable. We have Utah State Senator Stephanie Pitcher, who's been recognized as one of the most productive members of her legislature, getting stuff done in a difficult state on things like air quality and child care. And we have Marguerite Jimenez, who joins us from the States Project, which really believes that state legislators are the strongest force for change in the country. So please join me in welcoming our next panel.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Hi, Senator Pitcher, Marguerite. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be in Atlanta. Thank you so much to New Deal. I want to start by +1ing the Beltline, which is around the corner from our hotel entrance. If you have not taken a walk or a jog on it, get out there. It is a beautiful day. And I'm Caitlin Lewis. I'm the Executive Director of Work for America. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that helps state and local governments recruit and retain the public servants who keep our communities running, the folks we all have the pleasure of working with every day. I want to frame today's conversation around a very simple idea, one that we've heard a bit about so far today, which is if we want to get our government to work, we need to get the right people into the right roles, and even more importantly, we need to support them once they are there. At Work for America, we hear from elected leaders all the time that you cannot successfully campaign on hiring great people or building a high-functioning public sector workforce. These are the sexy issues that I think about all day, but is not necessarily something voters have high on their priority list. However, once you get elected, if you don't have the right people in the right roles, it is impossible to deliver on your big visionary campaign promises. And that is especially true right now. Since the presidential transition, we have seen thousands of federal workers be laid off. These are very deeply experienced, mission-driven public servants, and many of them are not done serving. They're just looking for what's next. One second on what we're doing at Work for America to address that particular piece of the problem before diving into the conversation. Our organization launched a program called Civic Match to help capture this once-in-a-generation talent opportunity. It's based on a very simple idea. We're trying to help keep great public servants in public service by connecting those outgoing federal workers with jobs in local and state governments across the country, and we're fortunate to be working with many of the folks in this room. Since November, we've had 9,000 job seekers apply for Civic Match, which is a bit of a gut punch when you think about what that means for the state of our federal government, but it also means that these are folks who want to keep serving in our communities. We're working with 200 different state and local governments, and we've seen hires across the country in Boston, San Francisco, Kansas City, Nashville, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and hopefully we'll get some great folks to come work for everyone in this room. So this is really just proof that the talent is out there and ready to serve. But attracting great talent is only half the battle, and we want to talk about the harder question today, which is how do we keep them once folks are in these roles? Because the truth is that our public sector isn't always set up to support the people in it, whether that's staff who are trying to raise families on part-time pay, or elected officials juggling caregiving, low compensation, and little support. So for strong public sector teams, we have to move beyond just hiring. So today let's talk about how do we reduce the barriers to public service, how we make it easier, especially for women and caregivers, to step into elected leadership and stay, and how we create the conditions that let local leaders govern effectively and deliver for their communities. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Senator Pitcher and Marguerite. Let's go ahead and dive in. And Senator Pitcher, I'm going to start with you. Based on your experience in the Utah State Legislature, can you speak a little bit to some of the structural and cultural barriers that you have seen that make it hard in particular for women and caregivers to enter and stay in public office? And I know you've done quite a bit to address these challenges, so would love to hear about that as well.
I do. There we go. There. Yeah, it's such a great question, and you know, it's hard to not answer that question without acknowledging the religious influence in my state, in the state of Utah. We're very predominantly, maybe not as much anymore, but still predominantly Mormon community, and there's been sort of this traditional message that women are caregivers, women should stay at home, and it's taken us some time to sort of overcome that and find ways to bring women into public office. So I think that has something to do with it. But I also think there's some really great data that talks about women and men and the ways that they look at job opportunities and when they apply. And the data traditionally shows that men will apply even when they meet fewer of the qualifications or the requirements of that job than women. I think that probably spills over to public service as well. And so those are some of the barriers. I think perception is also one of those things. It's hard to be something you don't really see. And if you look at the Utah State Legislature, I think just probably 25% of us are women. So that's tough. But I do think that we're making steps to overcome that. A couple of things that I've worked on to try to address this is my first year in office. Worked on a bill that allowed, all candidates to use public funds, or their campaign funds to go towards childcare and other types of expenses so that they can actually, thank you. Thank you. And since then, we've had candidates that have been able to take advantage of that in my state. So that was one. I worked on a bill a couple of years ago that creates a infant at work program. This is more for state employees, but allows them to bring their child into work for the first 6 months or until that child is mobile. Started as a pilot program, but really we're aiming to try to expand that. And really just, the goal is, you know, we look at just the state and the public sector in Utah. My colleagues aren't very receptive to mandates on the private sector, but the goal is to try to change the perception and show what it means to be a working mom or a young parent in the state of Utah.
I love it. Thank you. Zooming out a little bit with a more national lens beyond the state of Utah, Marguerite, your work has highlighted how state legislators are doing incredibly complex work and often have part-time or no pay, no staff, and limited infrastructure. So can you speak to some of the things that will help professionalize and support these elected officials so that they can govern effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to what the senator mentioned, there's also things around like proxy voting, commissions to address legislator pay. I know many of the state lawmakers in this room, many of you have multiple other jobs that you have to do in order to also serve as state lawmakers. You are all doing full-time jobs and getting at best part-time pay. If you come from the great state of New Hampshire, you're earning $100 for your legislative session, legislator pay that has not risen since the 1800s. If you look at how legislator pay in particular, if you look at it as it relates to inflation, legislative pay has actually gone down over the past 30 years as opposed to the opposite. So all sorts of things around professionalizing legislatures, things like on-site childcare, but also just, so there's been this increase, and again, I'm speaking from the state legislative perspective, but we've seen an increase, I think, at all levels of government of especially donors getting more and more interested in convincing people to run, right? And that's a great, I should say, my organization also spends a lot of time focusing on getting people to run and helping people win elections. So not to discount that, but think about the return on investment. If you're investing all of this money into getting people to run and win elections, but then there isn't a comparable investment in helping people succeed once they get there. So this is anything from training for elected officials, for some of the basics of how to do the job, especially in part-time roles or semi-professional roles where you're not getting the training that you receive. But it's also things like, it's the whole nuts and bolts. It's things like constituent services. We heard on the last panel. It's helping lawmakers and other elected officials really understand how do you communicate out the impact of the work that you're doing so that your constituents or those that you serve understand what you're doing so that they keep re-electing you, right? So this is not a one-time deal. We want more lawmakers to be able to stay in the profession, to be able to stay in these jobs. But that's also means investing in the supports beyond just the individual lawmaker, but also investing in legislative and public official staff, right? We all know that a lot of times your staff is what makes the difference between you being an effective lawmaker, or effective at your job, and not. And so one of the things that we're really seeing is a need for increased investment in training staff. So how to run an effective office, how to handle an influx of things, because lawmakers, especially right now, I think are just dealing with so much more than they have ever had to deal with. Whether that's something as basic as your own personal or physical security, to also having to deal with issues that you weren't actually, you didn't run on, you weren't elected to handle. So things like state lawmakers are dealing with tariffs right now. This is not something that is in the normal purview of a state lawmaker. So how do you deal with this influx? And so providing resources, everything from what you do when you walk in the door to how do you run for leadership? How do you become an excellent committee chair? So just really the whole life cycle for lawmakers.
Yeah, I think understatement of the millennium is that we're living in really complicated times, and our elected leaders are being saddled with many of the things that we're grappling with as a country right now. So Senator Pitcher, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that and how in your role as an elected leader you've managed some of these challenges personally and politically that maybe fell on your plate and weren't necessarily on the bingo card when you ran for office. And what's your advice for your peers in the room who are navigating similar challenges?
Yeah, we have such a tremendous job in front of us right now, and especially with everything that's going on at the national level, we are doing more with less. But I think despite sort of these chaotic times and so much instability right now, we're also living through an incredible transformation with AI and all of the tools that provides us. When I flew in last night, I was getting dinner with a friend who actually works for the legal team on the AI team at Google. And we're talking about all of these develops, and even she admitted, even though I work on this team, I don't really use AI. And I don't either. I've used it a little bit in my professional capacity, but there's a tremendous opportunity, I think, for us to really lean into these revolutionary tools to help us do our job in a way that's more efficient, that has access to a breadth of information, and really lean in, meet the moment. I also think that these types of events where we're able to connect and share ideas and experiences are incredibly helpful right now, where things are just different. But I think we need to understand that we need to be adaptable and flexible and rise to the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Gonna go back to the federal workforce crisis for a second, because there is a lot that cities and states can do to step up in this moment and support the workers who often live in your communities and were working for the federal government. We've seen executive orders and Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Mexico, Hawaii, many mayors stepping up, county executives, to really fast-track hiring processes for folks who have been laid off in their community. And so, Marguerite, I'd love for you to talk a little bit to some of the tools in the toolkit that local leaders can be thinking about if they do want to help support the federal workers in their community. What are some of the practical steps they can take to help bring these folks either into their own workforce or other roles within their community?
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to governors taking action, we're also seeing state lawmakers who are doing things like something as basic as like passing licensing reciprocity, or bills that remove certain requirements or make the requirements, the job skills that you might have developed as a federal worker, more easily transferable to state and local offices. Honestly, the thing that worries me, in addition to what's happening to federal workers, is what's happening to the pipeline of people to go into public servants. And I know this is something you spent a lot of time thinking about. As I'm seeing in the news things about removing funding for things like Vista and for AmeriCorps and programs that have traditionally served as pipelines. And one of the things, as the governor of Maryland was just on the screen before us, is really thinking about like what state and local officials can do to think about how do you replace those pipelines. One of the things that I love is seeing states like Maryland has a first in nation universal service program, right? So it's thinking about like how do you get young people, how do you create how do you restore the civic fabric, right, of our country? And Governor Moore talks a lot about service will save us, but this idea that if we can continue to create pipelines to incentivize students, especially students coming out of, like myself, with a lot of student loans, right? Public service matters for people. If we can make public service appealing, we can make public service something that people still want to do. I think that there's a lot that state and local officials can do to create those pipelines and to really fill a gap that I think is being left by the federal government that is going to, it will weaken, it weakens our civic fabric, right? People no longer have or won't have the same kind of experience serving in their communities and being part of the public sector that I think probably for everyone in this room was a really formative part of your own like professional upbringing.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I love about what Governor Moore and his team have done in this moment, in addition to partnering with Civic Match to help hire outgoing federal workers, is think about the workforce challenges they have and need to meet, and looking at the opportunities that this moment presents. So they've made efforts to fast-track teacher certification for outgoing federal workers, which has been really impactful because there are a lot of folks coming out of the DOE who want to stay in education, and the ability to fast-track that certification has led to more teachers in the state of Maryland. To the kind of licensing reciprocity, the state of Pennsylvania has actually made it such that if you are a part of the federal civil service, your civil service will count towards Pennsylvania's state civil service requirements. We've now seen the New York State Legislature introduce a bill that is similar in nature, which means that folks can enter state service from the federal government at the same level that they were at before. So these are all meaningful, kind of practical actions that state and local leaders can take. And would love for this last question, before we open it up to any questions, to speak to what you were just talking about, Marguerite, around the fact that government really does have a PR problem. And I loved working in local government. It was the time of my life, but often folks in government are seen as kind of bureaucratic or boring. We really need to change that narrative. And so would love to hear from each of you what you think some of the things are that we can do to shift that narrative, and what advice you would give to folks today considering going into public service.
Yeah, I think, we all have the ability now to control our own message in a way that we really didn't before. I mean, with the advancements of technology, on my end, I'm sending out a weekly newsletter, I'm active on social media, and so I think it gives us a tremendous opportunity to try to veer away from the traditional message that government is, there is a lot of bureaucracy to government, and finding ways to control our own message. There are good people that work in government. I mean, outside of all of us in this room, there are good people that find it as a duty and a call to service. I'll never forget, do you remember that New York Times opinion piece that came out during the first Trump administration? It was like an anonymous piece from somebody who worked in the administration and said, I see the issues but I'm here to prevent him from hitting the big red button, essentially. I was so intrigued by that message, that there are people that understand the challenges and that are there as a call of duty, I think. And so recognizing that there are others that find this duty is key. And then I think finding ways to connect and looking for those moments that inspire. After our last legislative session, I feel like I came out kind of despondent, and it's just a tough session. It's hard to be a Democrat in Utah. But I was very inspired by Cory Booker's 24-plus hour filibuster, and for me it was like such an incredible moment to see him take on such a feat, and it was very inspiring. And so I think looking for those moments of inspiration is key, but also understanding that we ourselves often are those moments for others.
Amazing. Thank you. Marguerite, same question for you.
I think public servants tend to be a humble bunch. And I think it's time to start taking some credit for all of the impact that folks are having, because I think a lot of times what we see is when you look at the numbers about like the percentage of the population who actually doesn't understand what their state lawmaker does, right? Or who don't understand, like they actually may have Medicaid and may be getting their health services through Medicaid or Medicare, but they don't actually know. And they don't actually know what their local public servants, their local electeds, their state electeds are doing to help improve their lives. What they do know is that when they go to the DMV, they don't have a positive experience, right? They have like long lines, but they're not seeing the like positive messaging. So I would love to see electeds and especially state lawmakers really out there talking about like this is how the work matters and this is how the work improves your lives. And doing some more credit claiming for the things that are going well. And that's not to say, to the earlier speaker's point, that we shouldn't acknowledge the things that don't work, right? I don't think any of us could sit here and be like, gosh, government is so perfect and there's just this mystery of like why people don't understand. But I really do think that connecting the work to the impact for people's lives, I think that does matter. And I think it's also a way to help address recruitment problems, right? Like if you want to be a problem solver, if you want to be one of the people who is actually making sure that people get their public benefits, making sure that people have a problem, like if you have a problem, imagine if people knew that it was just their elected officials. They're the problem solvers. They're the ones to call because those people are working for their constituents. So I think being clearer about what those stories are and making sure that voters and constituents understand who the people who are solving their problems really are, I think is an important step.
Yeah. Okay, I'll open it up to any questions. Don't be shy. The one thing I'll add to what Marguerite was just saying is remember that your staff are your greatest advocates. So if everyone who works for you can give a 1-minute pitch on why it rocks to work for your city or county or state, then you're in really good shape. And if not, that's not great. So start with your staff and make sure that they are not just excited to be working where they're working, but they know how to articulate that and they see themselves as advocates for the organization.
Hey, Jonathan from Michigan. So I spent 20 years working in DC and then had this experience of coming back and watching the state legislature try to figure out how to grapple with big issues. And my observation is like, it's not clear to me that the members and staff who realize like how constrained they are. They don't know what they're missing in terms of staff support and sort of institutional expertise and policy analysis and like all the stuff you sort of took for granted working in a legislature that was dysfunctional but pretty well resourced. Like, do you get the sense that like your colleagues or the legislators around the country that you're talking to, do they realize that there's stuff missing, or do they just think this is what the job is?
I think, I mean, I had the same experience working in DC, and then I moved back to Montana. And boy, in terms of low resource, yeah, I think it really depends. I think a lot of state lawmakers don't have the context because you don't, unless you're connected to a group of individuals like this, where you see cross-state connections. We did a staff training in Pennsylvania, training legislative staffers, and there was like over 100 people who show up. I did the same training in Arizona, and like it was great attendance in terms of people from Arizona showing up. There was like 12 people in the room, and that's for like both chambers. And so I think if you don't know, lawmakers from other states, I don't think you necessarily know what you're missing. But I think just also in general, even people who even donors or people who really, really care about state and local work, I do not think, especially if you're coming from the federal level, I don't think people have any sense that lawmakers in this state are making $11,000 a year, and by the way, they're holding down 2 other jobs, and when you call their staff hotline, guess who's answering? It's probably them on their way to pick up their kid from soccer, and then in terms of their policy staff, they're probably Googling it after their kid went to bed. People don't understand how low resource some of these environments are, and so then when you actually, and that also ties back to what we were talking about in the beginning of if we're talking about raising legislator pay, and you're up against this massive hill where people don't understand what their state lawmakers do, they don't understand that they're delivering for them, they don't understand how much they make, and so why would you want to raise those people's salaries? And so this whole communication cycle of explaining the sheer magnitude of what people are dealing with the amount of resources that they have to do this hugely impactful thing, is just, there's a major, major disconnect there.
Senator Pitcher, anything to add to that?
No, I agree. It was very well said.
Here. One more question, I think, in the back. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. Elizabeth Bennett Parker, delegate from Virginia. Thank you all. One exciting thing that I wanted to uplift in Virginia that we just did was we have childcare stipends for legislators during session now, and I will pass that along for hopefully every state to adopt. But I've also, I was following the proxy voting in Congress very closely because I've been working since 2019 in Virginia on sort of remote participation, remote meetings, even just for our volunteers on advisory boards, both at the local and state level, but now really turning that attention to legislators, recognizing how difficult it is as a mom of a 2-year-old to do this job. And I'm just curious if other states, it's been a while since I looked across all 50 states, but are any other legislatures making progress on sort of proxy or remote voting, particularly for parents and medical conditions?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So Utah, since COVID hit, we built, I think, a really efficient system for voting and connecting during a time when we weren't at the Capitol, and post-COVID, we maintained a lot of that structure in place. And so not only does it help new moms and young parents, but it also helps electeds who live in rural parts of the state and flying up to Salt Lake City for a vote, especially if we're outside of our normal session and we're just there for a day for an interim meeting. That's tough. And so we have really leaned into that. And during session, we're all there, but outside of session, people are connecting and voting remote, and it's been, I think, a very positive development. It's also helped us to connect to Utahns as well and increase civic participation in the process. So for us, it's worked very well. It's been a good development.
Marguerite?
I was just going to say, specific to Virginia, happy to connect with you afterwards to share some of the other proxy voting things as well. There are a number of different states who are tackling proxy voting, legislative pay, doing independent commissions, and we're seeing interesting traction. Like South Carolina's is debating something. Montana just did a legislator pay increase. So we are seeing stuff in the legislative modernization space, but proxy voting in particular, happy to give you a roundup basically of what states have tried and what we're seeing work and not work as well.
Amazing. I think that's all the time we have. So thank you so much, Marguerite, Senator Pitcher. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Just a couple of brief logistical updates from me before we move to the breakout sessions.